Elena had always lived in the shadows of her stepmother, Lady Vivian, a woman of high ambition and ruthless political cunning. After the tragic death of her father, Elena became little more than a pawn in her stepmother's endless schemes. While noble suitors came and went, none truly saw Elena for who she was, except for Lord Darius. He appeared one evening at a royal gathering, his presence commanding yet strangely elusive. Whispers followed him wherever he went, rumors of his wealth, power, and mysterious past. Unlike the other nobles, he did not bow before Lady Vivian's influence, nor did he see Elena as a mere tool for alliance. Their courtship was swift but intense, a secret affair hidden from the prying eyes of the court. Darius spoke of a future beyond the suffocating constraints of noble society, a future where Elena would be free to be herself. In him she found solace, passion, and most importantly, escape. Against all reason, she married him in secrecy, knowing that Lady Vivian would never approve. She left behind the gilded prison of her stepmother's household and stepped into the world of Darius, a world shrouded in secrecy. At first, life with Darius was everything she had dreamed of. He was a devoted husband, attentive and protective, showering her with affection that she had never known under her stepmother's rule. He took her to his grand estate, where towering walls and labyrinthine hallways seemed to hold secrets of their own. Servants whispered and averted their eyes when she passed, but Elena dismissed it as mere reverence for their master. Darius often disappeared at odd hours, his business always left unexplained, but whenever he returned, he held her close, assuring her that she was safe in his arms. Beyond the walls of their estate, unrest was brewing in the kingdom. The name of the Shadow King was spoken in hushed voices, a ruthless figure who struck fear into the hearts of nobles and peasants alike. Cities burned, and powerful lords vanished overnight, their bodies never found. The kingdom's ruler, King Aldrich, called for war councils, seeking to uncover the true identity of the enemy who seemed to be unraveling the kingdom from within. Elena heard the whispers, but they seemed distant, unreal, a nightmare that belonged to someone else's world. She had Darius, and that was all that mattered. When he looked at her with those deep, knowing eyes, all her fears melted away. He loved her, and love, she believed, could never hide true darkness. Lady Vivian, however, had not forgotten her. In her stepmother's mind, Elena was still an asset to be used, still a pawn in a larger game. Without knowledge of Elena's secret marriage, she sought to arrange another match, one that would strengthen her position at court. Letters arrived, commanding Elena to return, invitations from noble families seeking an advantageous union. She ignored them all, choosing instead to remain by Darius's side. But love, as Elena would soon learn, could blind as easily as it could heal. And the man she had married, the one who held her heart so completely, was not the man she thought he was. Elena's world remained blissfully untouched by the chaos outside the estate, until the disappearances began. Powerful noblemen, ones who had openly spoken against the Shadow King, started vanishing without a trace. Some were last seen riding toward their countryside manors, never to return. Others were discovered days later, their homes burned to the ground, entire families erased. The court was in turmoil, and the king's advisors whispered that a hidden hand was orchestrating the destruction of the kingdom's most influential figures. At first, Elena dismissed the rumors as the usual paranoia of court politics, but then she noticed the shift in Darius. His departures grew more frequent, his excuses vague and unconvincing. He would leave late at night, returning before dawn with a distant look in his eyes and the scent of smoke clinging to his clothes. Once, she woke to find him in their private study, hunched over a series of maps and letters written in a language she did not recognize. When she asked about them, he merely smiled, brushing away her concerns with a lingering kiss. The unease settled deep in her chest, but she wanted to trust him. He had given her love, a home, and freedom from Lady Vivian's grasp. And yet, doubt gnawed at her when she discovered a crimson stain on his sleeve one morning. Dried blood. Unmistakable. When she confronted him, he laughed softly, his fingers tilting her chin up as he told her not to trouble herself with such matters. "The world outside is dangerous, my love," he murmured. "You are safest when you ask no questions." That safety, however, began to feel like a cage. The first true warning came not from Darius, but from someone she had thought lost to her past, Prince Adrian. Once her childhood companion, he had since risen to prominence in the royal court, standing as one of the king's most trusted advisors. One evening, under the pretense of delivering an invitation to a royal gathering, he arrived at the estate. His eyes searched hers, wary and urgent. "You must leave this place, Elena," he said in a low voice. "I know you believe he loves you, but there are things you do not see." She stiffened at his words, her loyalty to Darius flaring instinctively. "You don't know him as I do." "No," Adrian admitted, "but I know what he is." He spoke then of secret reports, of intercepted messages that traced back to the Shadow King's hidden network. The attacks on noble houses, the assassinations, each one bore a pattern, one that led disturbingly close to her own husband. "You need to ask yourself," Adrian pressed, "why he keeps you so far removed from the outside world, why he never lets you see beyond these walls." Elena wanted to argue, to deny the implications, but the seed of doubt had already taken root. Returning to her chambers that evening, she found Darius waiting for her, his gaze knowing, his expression unreadable. "Prince Adrian is an interesting man," he mused, his fingers trailing along the spine of a book. "Loyal to the crown, protective of you." Something in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. Did he know about their conversation? Had he been watching? Before she could respond, a letter arrived from her stepmother, the words sharp and commanding. Lady Vivian was arranging a marriage for her, a political union that would cement her influence at court. The name of the suitor hardly mattered, only the power he wielded. Elena crumpled the letter in her hands. If Vivian knew the truth of her marriage, what would she do? The realization hit her like ice. Her stepmother had no idea she was already wed. And if Lady Vivian pushed too far, if she truly saw Elena as a piece to be moved on the chessboard of power, would Darius allow it? Or would he make her disappear, just like all the others? Elena's suspicion turned into quiet, relentless curiosity. She had ignored too many signs, dismissed too many questions that should have been answered. The estate that once felt like a sanctuary now loomed over her like a prison. Darius's love, once a source of warmth, now seemed to burn too intensely, like a flame meant to consume rather than protect. One evening, while wandering through the vast corridors of the estate, she noticed something peculiar. A door she had never seen before, hidden in the shadows of the grand library. It was slightly ajar, as if someone had left in a hurry. Her heart pounded as she stepped inside. The room was nothing like the elegant chambers she knew. It was dark, cold, and lined with towering bookshelves filled with tomes that reeked of age and secrecy. Strange relics lay scattered across a wooden table, golden coins etched with unfamiliar symbols, fragments of a broken crown, maps with markings that traced the path of the Shadow King's conquests. At the center of it all, a grand war table displayed miniature figures, some painted in the colors of the royal army, others in black. The black pieces outnumbered the rest. A chill ran down her spine as she moved closer. Among the papers and battle plans was a single worn scroll. Carefully she unrolled it, revealing text written in an ancient language. Some words, however, had been translated in ink below. "The bride of the darkness shall sleep beside the beast. Her love will blind her, and by her hands the kingdom shall fall." Elena's breath caught in her throat. The bride of darkness. Was it speaking of her? Before she could think further, she noticed a pile of letters tucked beneath the scroll. These were not just military correspondences. They were signed with the emblem of the Shadow King himself. As she skimmed through them, the truth unraveled before her in cruel, undeniable clarity. Darius was not a trusted noble. He was not a man working in the shadows to protect her. He was the Shadow King, the enemy of the kingdom, the monster who had orchestrated countless assassinations, the reason noble houses had burned, the reason men and women had vanished without a trace. And she had lain beside him in ignorant devotion. Her hands trembled as she clutched the letters, her vision blurring with horror and betrayal. A sound behind her made her spin around. Darius stood in the doorway. He did not look surprised. He did not look angry. If anything, he looked disappointed. "I had hoped you would never see this," he said softly, stepping forward. "Not because I wanted to deceive you, but because I wanted you to love me freely, without fear." Elena stumbled backward. "You," her voice broke. "You killed them. The nobles, the families. You burned entire cities." "They were obstacles." His tone was calm, as if discussing mere chess moves. "The kingdom is rotting, Elena. The king is weak, and his council is corrupt. I am not destroying this land. I am saving it." She shook her head, unable to believe the man she loved could say such things. "You've lied to me. I have protected you." Elena's body tensed as she gripped the letters in her hands. She had to escape. She had to warn someone. As if reading her mind, Darius sighed. "I can't let you leave, not until you understand. And I would rather die than let them take you from me." Terror flooded her veins. This was not a misunderstanding. This was not something she could reason her way out of. Darius loved her, but in the way that a storm loves the sea, willing to consume it entirely. Meanwhile, far away at court, Lady Vivian remained blind to the truth. She was still plotting Elena's arranged marriage, still pulling political strings as if she were the true power in the land. She had no idea that the daughter she sought to control was already bound to the most dangerous man alive. And now, Elena had only one choice: escape, or become the queen of a monster. Elena sat in the dimly lit chamber, her heart hammering against her ribs as Darius stepped toward her. The weight of the letters in her hands felt unbearable now, undeniable proof of who he truly was. The man she had trusted, the man she had given herself to, was the Shadow King, the kingdom's greatest enemy. Yet, as he looked at her with piercing eyes that had once been her comfort, she felt the cruel pull of love and betrayal twisting within her. "You don't understand, Elena," Darius said, his voice soft, almost pleading. "Everything I have done was for a purpose." She clenched her fists, trying to still the trembling in her fingers. "Murder? Destruction? That was necessary?" Darius exhaled, his expression unreadable. "Yes." He stepped closer, slowly, deliberately. "This kingdom is broken, ruled by a weak king, poisoned by nobles who hoard wealth while the people starve. I did what had to be done to fix it." She wanted to recoil, to scream at him for his delusion. But deep inside, a part of her, one she hated to acknowledge, understood the cracks in the kingdom that he spoke of. She had seen them herself. "But the people you killed," her voice wavered. "The homes you burned." Darius reached out, cupping her face with a gentleness that felt like a cruel mockery of the monster she now knew him to be. "Would you have ever loved me if you knew?" Tears burned in her eyes. "No." A flicker of pain crossed his face, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by something colder. "And yet you do love me. I see it in your eyes." She wished she could deny it, wished she could erase the part of her heart that still longed for the man she had believed him to be. But love did not die so easily. "I don't know who you are anymore," she whispered. Darius's jaw tightened. "Then let me show you." He turned from her and walked to the war table, his hands trailing over the map of the kingdom, where the black pieces now outnumbered the rest. "You could be my queen, Elena. Stand beside me, and we will rule together. The people will adore you." They will trust you. He turned to her, eyes gleaming with conviction. You could help shape a new world. Her breath caught. You're asking me to betray my kingdom. I'm asking you to save it. She stared at him, horrified. And if I refuse? His silence was answer enough. The man she had married was offering her a choice: stand beside him as his queen, or become his enemy. A war raged inside her. She could still walk away, could find a way to escape and warn the kingdom before it was too late. But doing so would mean standing against him. Could she do it? Could she condemn the man she had loved? A sharp knock echoed from beyond the chamber, breaking the suffocating tension. Darius narrowed his eyes, striding toward the door. Elena watched as a soldier entered, bowing his head before speaking. My lord, a gathering has been called at the palace. The high nobles are aligning themselves against you. Darius let out a low, bitter chuckle. Lady Vivian, no doubt. Elena's blood ran cold. Her stepmother, so blinded by her own ambition, was unknowingly throwing herself into the fire. She had no idea that her enemy was standing right beside her own stepdaughter, nor that she was pushing the most powerful nobles into a battle they could not hope to win. Darius turned back to Elena, his gaze searching hers. Decide, my love. His voice was quiet, but laced with a dark finality. Stand beside me, or watch your kingdom burn. Elena swallowed the lump in her throat. She had to make a choice. And no matter what she chose, she knew her heart would never be whole again. The weight of Elena's decision pressed down on her like a crushing tide, suffocating and relentless. She had loved Darius, perhaps still did in some broken, aching way. But love could not excuse the blood on his hands. He had given her a choice, but in reality, there had never been one. She could not stand by his side while he drowned the kingdom in fire and death. That night, as Darius led his forces to war, Elena made her escape. The estate was a fortress, guarded by his most loyal men, but she had learned its secrets in her time there. Hidden passageways and servants' corridors weaved through its depths, and under the cover of darkness, she slipped away. The journey to the capital was grueling, but she did not stop. The kingdom had to know. They had to prepare. By the time she arrived at the royal palace, the city was already stirring with tension. News of the Shadow King's growing army had spread, and nobles who had once dismissed the threat now gathered in desperation. Among them was Lady Vivian, her sharp eyes filled with calculating fury as she played her political game. When Elena stepped into the council chamber, all voices fell silent. The nobles stared, some in shock, others in suspicion. Lady Vivian's expression darkened. You dare return now, after all this time? Elena ignored the sting of her words and turned to the king's advisors. Darius is the Shadow King. Gasps rippled through the room. Adrian was the first to react. You're certain? I have proof, Elena said, her voice steady, despite the turmoil in her heart. Letters bearing his seal. War plans hidden in his estate. I saw them with my own eyes. Lady Vivian scoffed. Impossible. You've been missing for months, and now you return with wild accusations. Elena met her stepmother's glare. Because you were too blind to see what was happening, too focused on your own ambition to realize the real threat. Vivian's face twisted in outrage, but Adrian stepped forward before she could speak. If what Elena says is true, then we are out of time. The Shadow King's forces are moving. The council erupted into chaos, but the decision was clear. War was inevitable. Preparations were swift, the city fortifying itself as soldiers and noble houses aligned under the king's banner. The battle would decide the fate of the kingdom. When Darius's army arrived at the capital's gates, the sky was thick with smoke, the air humming with tension. His forces, clad in dark armor, stretched across the horizon like an unstoppable tide. At the head of it all, Darius sat upon his black steed. a grim figure of power and purpose. Elena stood upon the palace walls, watching as he raised a hand. With a single motion, the battle began. The clash of steel rang through the air as war descended upon the kingdom. Arrows rained down, siege weapons thundered against the walls, and the once peaceful capital became a battlefield. In the chaos, Lady Vivian fought not with swords, but with strategy, directing forces with ruthless precision. It was only when she caught sight of Darius cutting through the battlefield with deadly grace that she finally understood. Elena saw the moment the truth struck her stepmother, the widening of her eyes, the slight falter in her step. "No," Vivian whispered, horror creeping into her voice. "It can't be." Elena turned to her, her own expression grim. "You never saw it. You never even considered that I had already chosen my own path." Vivienne staggered back. "You married him." Elena did not answer. There was nothing more to say. Instead, she moved. Through the battlefield, through the chaos and death, she sought him. Darius stood at the heart of the war, a force of destruction unlike anything she had ever seen. Soldiers fell before him, his sword carving through them like shadows parting in the light. "Elena," his voice found her even through the din of war. He turned to face her, eyes dark with something unreadable. "You should not be here." Tears burned in her eyes. "Stop this." His expression softened for a moment, but only a moment. "It's too late." "It's not." She took a step forward. "We can still end this." His grip tightened on his sword. "I offered you everything. I would have given you the world." "I never wanted the world," she whispered. "I only wanted you." A flicker of pain crossed his face, but then it was gone, buried beneath the weight of his conviction. "Elena, step aside." "No." A storm raged in his eyes. "Then I have no choice." Neither did she. With a broken heart, Elena raised her blade. The battlefield was silent in the moments after the final clash. The fires that had raged through the night smoldered in the distance, and the once mighty army of the Shadow King lay in ruin. Bodies, friend and foe alike, littered the blood-stained earth, their swords and banners abandoned in the dirt. Elena stood over Darius, her breath ragged, her hands trembling as she gripped her sword. He had fallen to one knee, his dark armor cracked, blood seeping from the wound she had given him. His face, once unreadable, now bore something she had never seen before: defeat. He looked up at her, his lips twisting into a faint, almost bitter smile. "So this is how it ends." Tears welled in her eyes, but she did not lower her weapon. It didn't have to. He exhaled slowly, his strength fading. "You were always stronger than you believed." His voice was quiet now, edged with something that sounded almost like pride. "I knew you would choose them." Her chest ached at his words. "Then why did you still fight?" He let out a soft, weary chuckle. "Because I could never be what you wanted me to be." For the first time, she saw something in him that went beyond the mask of the Shadow King. Beneath the ambition and the cruelty, beneath the blood and the power, he had always been a man who believed himself a savior, a man who had convinced himself that he had no other choice. She stepped back, her sword lowering just slightly. Darius studied her, something unreadable in his dark gaze. And then, before she could react, he reached for something at his side. She moved on instinct, her blade flashing. His breath hitched, his body going still. The world seemed to stop as he slowly collapsed, his fingers curling around the hilt of his dagger, the weapon he had never gotten the chance to use. Blood pooled beneath him, and for the first time, his eyes, those same piercing eyes that had once held her so tenderly, began to dim. Elena fell to her knees beside him, her hands shaking. "Darius!" His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. And then, just like that, the Shadow King was no more. The battle was over. The days that followed passed in a blur. Elena could barely process what had happened. The war had ended, but the scars it left behind would never truly fade. The kingdom rejoiced in victory, yet everywhere she turned, she saw loss. Families mourning their fallen, cities in ruin, the weight of everything pressing down upon her like an unforgiving tide. She had won. But at what cost? In the royal court, the nobles scrambled to restore order, each vying for power in the absence of the Shadow King's looming threat. Alliances shifted, whispers of new rulers filled the air, and through it all, Elena found herself standing at the center of it. She had spent so long being a pawn in other people's games, her stepmother's ambitions, Darius's war. But now, for the first time, she had control over her own fate, and she would not let anyone take it from her again. Still, there was one final confrontation she could not avoid. Lady Vivian stood in the grand halls of the palace, her expression unreadable as Elena approached. For once there was no arrogance in her stance, no cold calculation in her gaze. Only silence. "Elena," she finally said, her voice measured, "you should not have kept your marriage a secret." A bitter smile tugged at Elena's lips. "Would you have cared if you had known?" Vivian stiffened. Elena took a slow breath. "You spent your entire life controlling me, deciding who I should be, where I should belong. And yet, when I needed you most, you never saw me." Regret flickered in her stepmother's eyes, so brief it could have been imagined. "I did what I thought was best." "No," Elena said, meeting her gaze with steady resolve. "You did what was best for you." For a long moment, Vivian said nothing. Then, after what felt like an eternity, she sighed. "Perhaps." It was not an apology, but it was the closest Vivian had ever come to one. Elena did not expect love between them to bloom overnight. Too much had happened, too much had been lost. But as she turned to leave, she heard her stepmother's voice once more, softer this time. "I underestimated you." Elena paused, then glanced back. "Yes," she said quietly, "you did." And then she walked away. The kingdom would heal in time. It would rise from the ashes of war, stronger and wiser than before. And so would she. Elena had been many things: a pawn, a wife, a traitor, a warrior. But now, standing on the precipice of a new era, she was something else entirely. She was free.